Fight fans, welcome to the PBC Podcast, brought to you by Premier Boxing Champions with your host, Kenneth Bouhairie and Michael Rosenthal.
Welcome, everyone, to the PBC Podcast. I'm Kenneth Bouhairie.
And I'm Michael Rosenthal, editor of USA Today's Boxing Junkie.
It's always good to talk boxing, especially at a time like this. That's what we're going to do this week. Star lightweight contender Isak Pitbull Cruz will be joining us in a little bit. Mike and I will take a look at last Saturday's PBC action and all the chatter that ensued from the main event between Carlos Adames and Julian Williams. And on toe-to-toe, we'll list our top 3 fighters we want to see Canelo Alvarez face. We all saw the recent news that had the boxing world buzzing. Canelo announcing on his social pages that his next fight is set for this September on Premier Boxing Champions. Mike, it's been days and folks are still talking about this, and that's saying something in an era where news typically only lasts a few hours. But I get it. We're at the midpoint of what has been an insane year for boxing. I mean, a lot of significant fights and outcomes. I was looking back at all the PBC events thus far in 2023, starting with Gervonta Davis's impressive stoppage of an impressive opponent in Hector Luis Garcia last January. And of course, a great undercard that has led us to Jaron Ennis facing Romain Villa July 8th on Showtime. I think that's going to be a great fight. O'Shaquie Foster became a world champion. So did Subriel Matias, who looks flat out dangerous. And speaking of dangerous, Brandon Figueroa outslugs Mark Magsayo and shows that he's just as good at featherweight as he was at 122. You add on 2 knockout wins for Tim Tszyu, one over Tony Harrison and the other over Carlos Ocampo. I mean, that's really raised his stock and the profile of a potential matchup versus undisputed 154-pound champion Jermell Charlo. Then March 25th, David Benavidez versus Caleb Plant. Highly anticipated PBC pay-per-view that lived up to the hype and gave us a young star in Benavidez. And then 2 weeks later, Brian Mendoza stuns the boxing world and knocks out Sebastian Fundora in thrilling fashion. Then on April 22nd, to top that all off, Gervonta Davis becomes an early front runner for Fighter of the Year by notching an excellent win over an undefeated top 5 lightweight in Ryan Garcia. We still have the July 8th card and plus the return of Frank Martin on July 15th. I mean, that's an amazing year. I think one that is bringing boxing back into mainstream consciousness. And now Canelo makes this announcement. But before we get into Canelo, first, I got to ask you, Mike, I mean, what has stood out to you thus far in 2023?
Well, as you're going through those lists, I'm sort of like, I'm thinking there's 3 things that stand out to me, I think. So I like the Gervonta Davis's performance against Ryan Garcia, which was typically strong. He dominated the fight. It ends it in a knockout in spectacular fashion. But what really stood out was just how massive that event became. It just really took hold, beyond boxing fans. It really it fascinated, seemed like it fascinated everybody in the world. I obviously they're onto something in terms of the way that they market themselves. It was just so obvious, 1.2 million pay-per-view buys in the United States is just massive. So that really stood out. I think the second thing that stood out to me was Tim Tszyu, and it was really the second performance. That knockout was just, I'll just never forget that knockout, as long as I live. It was really, really spectacular. And I think it stamped him as a future star. Of course, he has his big fight coming up. We'll see what happens. But that was just a massive, massive knockout. And the third thing was, and you didn't mention this, but the announcement of Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence. That's how big that fight is. The announcement stood out in my mind in the first half of the year, because that just shows you how big that fight is. So yeah, lots happened, and we still have a lot more to go.
Yeah, it's been an amazing year so far. Now we have Canelo making his announcement. What was your reaction?
Well, as I wrote on Boxing Junkie, I don't even know how to pronounce my own website, Boxing Junkie, Canelo didn't have to sign with PBC to fight PBC fighters. He faced Caleb Plant. The fact that he put pen to paper simply makes negotiations easier. And more important, it makes his intentions clear. He obviously made a decision to fight PBC's top super middleweights, including David Benavidez. He's finally, the way it appears to me, he's finally focusing more on who he's fighting than his pursuit of these shiny belts, which to me aren't as important. For that reason, I like this move by Alvarez. It portends what could become a series of really, really compelling matchups. I can't wait to see how this plays out.
Yeah, that's a really great point. It's interesting when Canelo beat Caleb Plant in that great undisputed match in November 2021, the consensus was that he was the world's best boxer. Where do you rate him now?
I don't think he looked as good as we've come to expect from him in his last two fights, against Triple G and John Ryder. I think that's just the standard way of looking at it. I think most people think that. That could mean that he has begun to decline after 17 years as a professional. Remember, he turned pro at 15. Or maybe there are other reasons. He had wrist surgery late last year. Who knows what lingering effects that might have. And I wonder about his motivation. He didn't want to fight Golovkin again. That was obvious. And it might have been hard for him to get up for Ryder. It's hard to get up fight after fight after fight after fight if it's not like the biggest fights. Maybe that was a problem in that fight. I don't know. The point is that I think it's too early to dismiss him. He's only 32 after all. I think a healthy, motivated Canelo can still do some serious damage.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I think we're in agreement here, but do you think he has one last great run in him?
I'll say I won't be shocked if he takes down PBC's top 168 pounders, which would be a hell of a run. He hasn't looked the same, but again, he's only 32. And no one really questions his ability. You have to have special ability to climb to number one on pound for pound list, obviously. I think he has more to give. He knows. Plus, think about this. He knows what people are saying about him, that he's not what he was. The desire to prove people wrong could be can really light a fire under a fighter. It can really be a strong motivating factor. And I think and obviously he knows this, and I think he's going to come out on fire for his next fight. I really do.
What would that do for his legacy? Running through this gauntlet.
Well, he's already one of Mexico's greatest fighters ever and a first ballot Hall of Famer. No active fighter can match his resume, at least not one that I could think of. That said, if he can prove his doubters wrong and deliver that one last great run that we've described, maybe he crosses over into something resembling a legend, that kind of thing. I'll add this, though. He can't lose. If he loses even once, he might have to, rest on his past laurels. In fact, I think he would have to win these fights convincingly. I think if he scrapes by, I think his critics aren't going to go anywhere. So I think in his perfect world, I think he gives us however many fights he has with PBC, however long this run is, that he gives us one really good performance after another.
Yeah, well, one thing's for sure, he's got plenty of great opponents and great fights ahead of him. I'm looking forward to it. We're going to discuss the potential super fights for Canelo a little later in the show on Toe to Toe. So let's get into the week in review. Last Saturday, PBC on Showtime presented a triple header topped off by Carlos Adames successfully defending his interim WBC middleweight world title with a 9th round TKO over Julian J-Rock Williams. Mike, a good number of folks, including Williams and his trainer, Stephen Breadman Edwards, thought the stoppage was premature, I should say.
Maybe immature too.
Yeah. Well, what did you think of the stoppage?
I'll put it this way. I don't think it was as bad as Breadman did, although I certainly understand his frustration. The problem for me was the timing was a bit off because, while Adames was attacking, he wasn't landing at that moment, and Williams was still defending himself. Normally those aren't the circumstances that would warrant a stoppage. At the same time, Williams took a pretty bad beating most of that round. I believe referee Mark Nelson was genuinely trying to protect Williams when he stopped the fight. Was it the best stoppage? Was the timing perfect? No. Was it the worst stoppage? Far from it.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you. I can understand both sides of the debate. And, I've been scrolling through my social media timeline. A lot of people are surprised by how competitive the fight was. Were you?
No, I think we both said last week that Williams is a handful when he's at his best, and he was near his best. He was really good in that fight. You could see his skill, his experience, all that. As long as he's on his feet, he's going to be competitive with pretty much anybody. And I was really impressed with his resilience. Maybe that was a bit of a surprise. I thought he was out in round 4, but he survived and he held his own, in some pretty hairy exchanges after that. He came up short, but he proved to me that he can still fight at an elite level.
Yeah. And, Julian Williams is the type of fighter who can rise to the occasion. Although, you alluded to how competitive the fight was, yet at the time of the stoppage, Adames led on all 3 cards by scores of 80-72, 78-74, and 77-74. How did you have it?
So I also had it 78-74, 6 rounds to 2. Meaning the fight wasn't necessarily that close on the scorecards, even though it was a competitive fight. It definitely was a competitive fight, but on the scorecards, I gave Adames the nod in 6 of the 8 rounds. I guess I could see 77-75, but really no closer than that.
What were your thoughts on Adames's performance?
I thought a good performance was sort of lost in the controversy over the ending. And a solid performance by Williams, which, like you said, might have surprised some people. Adames, took the fight to Williams from beginning to end. His body work was just absolutely brutal. And it obviously contributed to Williams' downfall, at least from my perspective. And I just think he was in control for most of the fight. It was a good performance against a really good opponent.
Motivating too.
Yeah, which is an excellent night's work. I thought he did a good job. Was it a fantastic performance? No, but it was really good.
So did this fight change your opinion of him one way or the other?
Not really. It confirmed what I already thought about him, that he's a legitimate threat to any middleweight. He didn't blow out Williams, as maybe some expected, but you can't blow out everyone at the top level of the sport. It just doesn't happen. Adames is a really good all-around fighter who's at or nearing the top of his game. I think he's legit.
What about Williams? Did he show you anything that surprised you, or did your opinion change about him perhaps one way or the other?
Well, as I suggested before, I think he still has something. I think with him, it's going to come down to desire. Does he want to keep doing this after another disappointment? I'll say this. He's a fighter through and through. That was obvious on Saturday night. I won't be surprised if he gives it another go, and I kind of hope he will. I have a lot of respect for this guy.
Who would you like to see Adames face next?
I'm going to almost always say this when a guy's at his level. He's like right there. I'd like to see him get that title shot, he has coveted. I'm speculating, but I guess, it might come down to what WBC champion Jermall Charlo does. If he ends up fighting Canelo Alvarez, there's some talk of that. Maybe he vacates the title, then Adames could fight for the vacant title. Golovkin is ranked directly below Adames, who has expressed an interest in facing Triple G. Maybe that's the fight. I don't know. At any rate, Adames's title shot should come sooner rather than later. I think he's earned it. I think he's ready.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like he deserves to be in a big fight. Now, in the co-feature, 154-pound contender Erickson Lubin impressively stopped Luis Arias in 5 rounds. This was a big win for Lubin, coming off that incredible fight of the year candidate against Sebastian Fundora 1 year ago, where he fought valiantly in a losing effort. How does this Lubin, the one we saw on Saturday night, compare to the one who fought Fundora?
I thought he looked as good as ever. He's a good boxer. He's a good athlete, and he's one of the best offensive fighters in the world. Which from my perspective allowed him to outclass Arias. Lubin just dominated this guy. I don't know whether Arias beat the count. That way we could also discuss that. He seemed to get up like around 9.5. I don't know if he beat the count or not, but he really had no chance to win that fight. If Lubin can resist getting into firefights like the one that led to his demise against Fundora, I think he's going to give anybody trouble. Yeah. I still think he's a super talented guy. I still think he could do special things. He's stumbled a few times, but I still think he's got that in him.
Yeah, there's still time. Where does he go from here?
Well, he might be, that was his first fight after a knockout loss. So he might be another victory or two from getting a big opportunity. But I think he took a significant step in that direction on Saturday. I can see him fighting a fringe contender or even a guy that's in the top 10, maybe right now. He's ranked number 6 by, let's put it this way. He's ranked number 6 by the WBC. I looked at the guys ranked above him and just below Jermall Charlo and thought Erickson Lubin can hang with them, like all of them.
Yeah.
One of them was Sebastian Fundora, so I'm suggesting maybe a rematch is in order. But I think Erickson can hang with any of those guys. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens. But again, I like what I saw on Saturday night.
Yeah, and I know Fundora obviously probably wants to get back at Brian Mendoza, but yeah, I like the idea of a rematch between these two guys. Now, in the televised opener, unbeaten Fernando Martinez stopped previously unbeaten Jade Bornea in 11 rounds to retain his IBF 115-pound title. You know, Bornea was bleeding badly from his right ear. That's putting it mildly. Mike, first, have you seen anything like the way that cut happened?
I've seen a lot of gruesome cuts. You know, one of the first ones I thought of when I saw what happened to Bornea was Vitaly Klitschko's cut against Lennox Lewis, which was really bad. If you're interested, go back and look at that. This one was unusual because of the way it, kind of exploded. You know, Martinez caught Bornea with a left to the ear, and it just like boom, blood even splattered on the camera lens, which was really, really unusual and really gruesome. That I've never seen before, where blood actually splattered on the lens, and everybody who was watching on TV got a big shot of the blood. I was surprised that Bornea was allowed to continue for a while. I mean, that cut again was as gruesome as they get. Go check that out. His ear is just destroyed, but the officials finally got it right. The sad thing for Bornea was that he was given a good performance when that happened, even though he was behind on the card. I thought he looked pretty good.
Yeah, which leads to my next question. I mean, what did you make of the fight and of Martinez's performance?
Well, the fight, it was a good competitive fight, maybe more competitive than I expected it to be. Bornea did a good job of sticking and moving, keeping Martinez on the outside where he couldn't do much damage. I think that Martinez was frustrated for the first half of the fight. Eventually, though, Fernandez started getting inside. He started landing more and more punches. He was in the process of winning a decision, I think, when the fight was stopped.
Yeah.
So in the end, for him, it was a pretty good performance. He dealt with some adversity and overcame it. And again, I thought that Bornea showed me something.
What's next for Martinez?
Who's the next Filipino in line? First, he beat Gervonta Davis twice, and now Bornea's got 3 in a row. I'm just kidding, though. I imagine he'll now target one of the top guys in that amazing division, the deep, top-heavy division. Maybe he goes after one of his fellow title holders, Juan Francisco Estrada,
Great fight.
the new champion Kazuto Ioka or Junto Nakatani. There's also Bam Rodriguez and Roman Gonzalez. Kosei Tanaka is next in line in the IBF. He has a lot of options. This is a really deep division at the top, so he has a lot of options. I'd like to see him tackle one of the stars because I want to see whether he can hang with them. I like his style. He's the kind of guy who's just going to keep coming and coming and coming. Nobody's really going to be eager to fight this guy, but now we'll see if he can handle like some of the names that I mentioned. Those are some of the top fighters in the world, let alone in the division.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, he's athletic and he's tenacious. I mean, those two things can create problems for a lot of people. I want to see him in a big fight as well. Time to bring in our guest this week, a star lightweight contender who returns against Giovanni Cabrera in a dangerous matchup Saturday, July 29th on the Errol Spence, Terence Crawford card on Showtime Pay-Per-View. Pitbull, Cruz. Isaac, how's it going, man?
Todo muy bien, gracias. Descansando un poquito.
I'm good, just resting a bit, you know?
Yeah, I can imagine. How excited are you to have a fight date and to be back in the ring?
No, pues estamos muy contentos, estamos muy motivados y por ahora estamos trabajando muy duro en el campamento para ir a dar una gran pelea el próximo 29 de julio.
We're pumped, we're motivated, and we're ready to put on a show on July 29th. That's what the entire preparation is for.
Your opponent, Giovanni Cabrera, is undefeated, is a very good boxer. What can you tell us about him from what you see?
Pues es un peleador que va invicto, que ha tenido igual grandes peleas, pero yo creo que su fortaleza es su alcance y su estatura y bueno, nosotros estamos trabajando en sus fortalezas y en sus debilidades también.
An undefeated fighter that certainly has had some great fights so far. He relies on his reach and his height, so that's what we've been preparing for so far.
Isaac, do you watch tapes of your opponent or do you leave that up to your training team?
No, totalmente, todo el equipo y pues nos fortalecemos y nos retroalimentamos de los videos y de ahí vamos obteniendo información de de las fortalezas y debilidades de los oponentes.
It's constant feedback between me and my team, always keeping each other informed and studying our opponents, so that we both know the strengths and weaknesses that we have to face come July 29th.
Very good. So in the main event, we have a legitimate super fight. Errol Spence versus Terence Crawford. Who do you like in that fight and why?
Pues no tengo un favorito para esa pelea. Es una pelea muy entretenida, es una pelea que pues va a estar entretenida lo que dure y pues da 50-50 mi opinión y los dos son grandes peleadores, son peleadores fuertes.
They're both strong fighters. To say that there's a favorite in that fight will be lying to you. It's a 50-50 affair. Definitely going to be entertaining. And I'm looking forward to seeing it in person.
Yeah, I think we all are. Now, the last time we saw you, Isaac, was at the Gervonta Davis, Ryan Garcia fight. And everywhere you went, you were mobbed by fans. How have you adjusted to this newfound fame?
Pues yo creo que la gente es muy difícil de tenerla de tu lado. Sabemos que la gente en un deporte como el boxeo muy difícil se entrega a un boxeador, ¿no? Entonces creo que conmigo han visto lo que en pocos mexicanos les han hecho sentir esas ganas, esa entrega arriba del ring y bueno, yo de mi parte pues no los voy a defraudar, no los voy a decepcionar y al contrario voy a brindarles siempre grandes combates.
It's so tough to gain the love and admiration of fans, and to have it is to treasure it. So it's my duty to go out there and give my best in every single fight for them, because you know it's what we work for. It's the fans that, you know, with their love and support that allow us to reach the heights that we do.
Now, that night we saw Davis stop Garcia in 7 rounds. What did you think of his performance?
Pues fue una pelea hasta cierto punto entretenida. Yo esperaba que Ryan iba a aguantar un poco menos, pero pues no supo contrarrestar ese poderío de Gervonta y bueno, pues Gervonta hizo una buena pelea, sabiendo esperar el momento indicado para conectar el golpe y bueno, creo que lo logró.
It was an entertaining fight up to a point. I thought Ryan wasn't going to last as long as he did. Gervonta is smart, and he found the exposure point, if you will, that when Ryan opened himself up, and that's how the fight went. Not surprising, really.
Did you see any changes in Tank? Is he better maybe than he was when you fought him?
Pues sí, sabemos que yo le contrarresté toda la pelea, pues su golpe letal que fue el upper de mano izquierda, y entonces pues ya después de esa pelea que tuvo contra mí, las 3 que ha tenido, pues ya no se han visto que tire ese golpe, gracias a que nosotros le supimos contrarrestar ese poderío.
I would say he has, because I showed him that his uppercut from the southpaw stance not really working. His uppercut from the left side, and in the 3 fights that he has had since then, he hasn't really employed it. So you could say that I taught him a lesson and that he has employed it well since then.
You pushed him as hard as anybody, pretty much. You stayed on top of him the whole fight. Excuse me. Is that the way to give Tank problems?
Sí, totalmente. Creo que a cualquier peleador se le dificulta la presión. Entonces, pues muy pocos peleadores son los que saben contrarrestar esa presión.
Totally. Very few fighters know how to counteract that kind of pressure. No fighter really likes it, so that's the way to go.
You know,
I was going to
Go
ask you
ahead.
if you would do anything different in the rematch, but it sounds like you wouldn't.
Bueno, sabemos que aquella vez tuvimos poco tiempo, no tuvimos un plan de trabajo adecuado y yo creo que sí habría mucho cambio siempre y cuando nos den el tiempo necesario y adecuado para poder hacer un plan de trabajo a la perfección.
I wouldn't necessarily say that because keep in mind that during that first fight, we really didn't have enough time to implement a proper game plan and a proper preparation. Now, if you give us enough time now to prepare, then I would say that yeah, we will switch some things up.
You know, there are some people who say that the fight was close because Davis was injured and he was fighting one-handed. Is that fair?
No, porque todos pueden hablar de la lesión de que tuvo Gervonta del sexto round. Yo tuve una lesión toda la pelea, yo iba lesionado y yo no puse ningún pretexto. Yo creo que ese fue el pretexto de ellos y los que la soportan, ¿no? Entonces, pues yo no tuve ningún problema y le hice frente a él y con la mano lesionada toda la pelea, le peleé los 12 rounds.
Everybody can talk about Gervonta's injury in the sixth round, but what they don't mention is that I also fought injured during the entire fight. My hand was busted up as well, but I didn't make excuses. I still put up the good fight. So if I was able to do it without any excuses, I don't see why he should be, have any kind of consideration that I didn't have.
Now, there was a talk at one point of perhaps you fighting Ryan Garcia. Do you recall what happened with that?
Pues que nunca hubo un contrato existente, nunca se lo hicieron llegar a mi empresa, a mi manager, entonces por eso no se pudo llegar a un acuerdo.
Simple. No contract ever arrived at my doorstep or to my team, so there was nothing that could be done without that.
Okay. Excuse me. So we also recently saw Devin Haney outpoint Vasily Lomachenko. Did you watch that fight? And if so, what did you think?
Pues fue una pelea entretenida. Ahí a quien favorecieron fue a Haney para no quitarle los cinturones, pero creo que el que tuvo que haber ganado fue Lomachenko.
It was an entertaining fight. Lomachenko should have won, but Haney was favored to be able to keep his belts.
When people talk about the top level lightweights, so they often mention Davis and Haney, Stevenson, Lomachenko first. Those are the guys they mentioned first. Should you be in that group?
Pues va a llegar su momento y yo lo voy a lograr demostrándolo arriba del ring, no como algunos de ellos que por redes sociales lo han conseguido. Entonces a mí me gusta ganarme las cosas bien y de la mejor manera, que es arriba del ring, para estar dentro de esas grandes imágenes, de esos grandes comentarios.
The time will come for that consideration to be made, for me to earn my place among the ones that are considered the best fighters in the division, because I like to earn my place fighting in the ring and by my own merits, not like some of those that you mentioned that earned their place in that Mount Rushmore because of what they did in social media, not necessarily because of what they fought for.
So if you had to rank the top lightweights in order, what would be your rankings? Who's the best? Who are the top 4 or 5?
Pues en número 1 pondría yo creo que a Gervonta.
Gervonta number 1.
En el número 2 a Isaac Cruz.
Isaac Cruz number 2.
En el tercero pondría a Lomachenko.
Lomachenko completing the podium.
En el número 4 a Haney y en el 5 a Stevenson.
Haney number 4, and then Stevenson rounds out the top 5.
Okay. And if you had to, looking out for the next year, obviously you have the Cabrera fight coming up and you'd have to take care of business in that fight. But if you could plan out the next year for yourself, how would it go?
Pues estar obteniendo 2 o 3 peleas con los nombres que mencioné y bueno, estar enfrentándome en grandes arenas.
I wanna fight in the biggest arenas in front of the best fans, and I want 2 or 3 fights against the 4 people that I mentioned in that ranking.
Very good. So getting back to your fight against Cabrera, given your two styles, how do you expect that fight to play out?
Pues él va a tratar de querer salir a correrme como lo hizo o como intentó hacerlo Ramírez en la última pelea. Entonces nosotros vamos preparados para todo tipo de trabajo, todo plan de trabajo que él lleve.
I expect Cabrera to try to walk around the ring and kind of have me hesitate like Ramirez tried in my last fight. So that's what I'm preparing for. There is no real mystery.
Does it go the distance?
Nosotros nos estamos preparando para lo que tenga que durar la pelea, sea un round o sean los 12.
We're preparing to fight 1 round or 12 rounds.
Isak, you're a straight shooter. We like that. Thanks so much for joining us.
Al contrario, gracias a ustedes.
Buena
Thank
suerte.
you, guys.
Thank you, Isak. And I think you should grow the mustache too.
Pues ojalá que pronto salga y ya vamos a estar igual de bigotones.
Oh, okay. Oh, the mustache is coming soon. It's a PBC podcast premiere right here.
Awesome. We can't wait. Isak, thank
Love
you so much. All the best to you on July 29th.
Gracias.
Errol Spence Jr. is one of the best boxers on planet Earth. And down goes Kell Brook. Errol Spence with some sweet combinations.
He is the winner by technical knockout. You've got the 3 belts. What's next? And now the unified welterweight champion of the world.
Everybody know who I want next. I want Terence Crawford next.
I do believe this is the perfect time. You got 2 great fighters in their prime for all the marbles. It's going to be an exciting fight. I just can't wait for it to happen.
That's the fight we all want to see.
There's been a back and forth a lot with you and Bud Crawford.
I don't know your number. Save it. I want all the smoke. But right now, I'm looking at Terence Crawford.
Just for undisputed. This is a big moment for not only myself, but for Errol Spence Jr.
Saturday, July 29th, they're going to crown the first 4-belt undisputed champion in 147-pound history.
The wait is over. Watch me fry this fish. Yeah, I know what time it is, baby. Terence, I'm coming for that motherfucking belt.
It's time for Mike and I to go toe to toe. We've discussed the return of Canelo Alvarez, and now we're going to talk about the top 3 fights for Canelo Alvarez. Lots of great opponents at 168, and here are the 3 we want to see. We'll go in ascending order, of course. So, Mike, why don't you announce our number 3?
Yeah, real quick, I just wanted to preface this by mentioning somebody who did not make the list, which is David Morrell. He definitely deserves to be mentioned. I mean, from what I've seen, from what we've seen, I think we agree. The talent level is just absolutely immense. One of our top three guys could end up tangling with this guy at some point soon. If that happens, do not be surprised if it's Morrell who has his hand raised. And then we'd have to reconfigure the list. But we at least wanted to mention Morrell. So my number 3 is our number 3, is Demetrius Andrade. I've said it many times. I wouldn't be comfortable with my fighter facing Andrade. He's a super slick, super awkward southpaw, that'll make you look horrible, even if you find a way to beat the guy. I know he doesn't have a defining fight. We see what we see, though, a nightmare opponent. For that reason, I think he's a legitimate threat to Alvarez, which is how it's supposed to be, right? That's what we want. Canelo has seen it all, and obviously has a Hall of Fame ability. I think there's a good chance he'd be able to figure out Andrade and win the fight. I'm just not 100% convinced of that. Absolutely intriguing matchup.
Yeah, and I'm sure Andrade would love nothing better than to settle the score with Canelo. After that press conference a couple years back when Canelo told him he wanted a payday and told him to leave the press conference. He also told Andrade that he was a horrible fighter, And we know that's not the case. I think Andrade is highly motivated to face Canelo and silence his critics, and he possesses the skills to do it. He's a tall, rangy, southpaw boxer, puncher. He's got a wealth of experience. That's a long night for anybody. Let's move on to number 2, two-time world champion and the current WBC world middleweight champ, Jermall Charlo. This is a fight fans have been clamoring for years. What's your take on it?
I'm with them. I've been calling for this matchup for a long time. I know Charlo would have to move up and wait for the fight, which would probably be a disadvantage, at least on paper. He also has been out of the ring for 2 years to deal with some stuff. That obviously is not good when you're talking about meeting a guy like Canelo. I don't think an Alvarez victory is a given, though. I still don't think that. I've been a big fan of Jermall Charlo for a long time. I think he's an excellent boxer, maybe a better technician than his brother. He has better than average power, and he's experienced in big fights. He's not going to be fazed by that night at all. It's just not going to be fazed. He's not going to be like a deer in headlights. If Alvarez, enters that ring at less than 100%, I think he could be in big trouble against Charlo. And to be honest, even at 100%, I wonder.
Right. I mean, I think Charlo's inactivity is a concern. It's been about 2.5 years since we last saw Jermall, but maybe the time off does him some good. Maybe moving up to 168 helps. And if his trainer, I mean, who knows? We've seen this happen before so many times in boxing. And look, if Ronnie Shields can get him right, look out, because the guy I saw beat Sergey Derevyanchenko in 2020, that guy is a pound-for-pound talent capable of beating anyone. He's got an excellent jab. He's got power in both fists. He's fundamentally sound. He's explosive. He's gritty. He's got an iron chin. What a comeback story that would be if he beat Canelo.
And honestly, I think it's a distinct possibility. I don't know why people overlook Jermall Charlo. I think he's really a terrific fighter. I think we've seen it over and over again. I think he's really good. And I think he's got a shot in that fight.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's move on to number 1, Mike. I think everyone knows who this is.
Yeah, I mean, if they don't, they're just not paying attention. David Benavidez. This is the fight. I don't ask for much in life. Is it too much to ask for this fight? Again, this is the best thing about Canelo's decision to sign with PBC. I believe it transforms a fight with Benavidez from a possibility to a probability. Although I guess I could be overly optimistic. I'm always going to be optimistic, hoping that they're going to make these fights. But I think there's a better chance now than before. Benavidez, as I've said a million times, just a beast. He's an excellent all-around fighter, but an absolute offensive machine that just chews up opponents and then spits them out. I believe he's still the most accurate puncher in the game, according to CompuBox, and last time I checked. And I think that's something significant. Can he beat Canelo? I don't know. I do know he's the younger, hungrier, naturally bigger guy, in addition to being really good, making him a legitimate threat to the Mexican star. Bottom line, Benavidez is the best, in my opinion, is the best possible opponent for Canelo Alvarez. We have to see that fight. Yeah,
and Canelo Benavidez might be the biggest fight in boxing. I mean, I feel like I say that every couple months now, but this is a huge, huge event, and it's a terrific matchup of styles. Will this be a passing of the torch type fight? Does the legend have one more great fight left in him? I don't know. I love this fight and can't wait to see it, because I do believe it's going to happen at some point. Like you, I believe that it's now a probability rather than a possibility. And I think the buildup for this fight, Mike, would be tremendous.
Yeah, I think you hit on something there, that how big the fight could become. Number one, it's the Mexico versus a Mexican versus a Mexican American,
that's right.
which is always a big thing. I bet there's people out there that don't know how loquacious David Benavidez is. He's a really good talker, and obviously Canelo doesn't trash talk that much, but he does.
He's pretty good at it though.
But sometimes he's really good at it. But Benavidez is a really, really good talker, so the lead up to that fight would really be something special, and the matchup is just fantastic. I mean, just from a fan perspective, I mean, come on. And you mentioned passing the torch. You just wouldn't want to miss that fight.
Yeah, exactly. I can't wait to see what happens with Canelo, and just loving the year that is boxing in 2023. That's going to do it for this week's show. We want to thank Isaac Cruz for joining us, and to you guys for listening. Be sure to check us out next week for more boxing talk right here on the PBC Podcast.